Hello and Assalamu alaikum. I'm Marwa, welcome to Narramus. Pakistan's energy sector is in crisis. It has been badly affecting industries, but now its negative weight is affecting the public to an extent that electricity has become almost unaffordable to the middle class in Pakistan. Back in 2013 even, the subsidies to the energy sector were more than 13% of the government's current expenditure, which was more than the cost of running the civilian government. And as of now, the electricity capacity payments are more than our defense budget. These are projected to increase by 33% to 2.8 trillion by the end of this financial year. We have been told that the energy crisis is basically caused by major supply-side constraints. Inefficiency in generation, transmission and distribution systems, exacerbated by theft, are the reason behind continuous higher electricity prices. This is one big fat lie. We are in this mess primarily because of poorly negotiated independent power producers' contracts. In this episode, we'll trace back historic missteps taken by different stakeholders and leadership that have brought us to this situation. This crisis is the product of ill-conceived IPPs contracts. Expensive fuel mix, capacity payments issues, perpetual circular debt, and dodgy tariff designs are all the derivatives of these contracts. The story of IPPs in Pakistan started in the mid-1980s, when the Zia regime sought intervention of the private sector in power generation. WAPDA was established in 1986 as the first and largest private sector power generation venture in Asia. Why did we go that way? In 1985, lack of funds in the public sector forced the government to discontinue its support to WAPDA and look for private sector cooperation. But load shedding increased in the country while the WAPDA project was still in the works. In early 1990s, the government expected a power shortage of about 2,000 megawatts in the years ahead, which was too exaggerated a demand estimate. This led to that fateful 1994 task force report, which laid down the institutional foundations of our current energy crisis. Based on the report recommendations, Pakistan embarked upon commissioning a large number of IPPs. Incentives offered to IPPs were embarrassingly generous. They were guaranteed back then a return of up to 25% on equity for 20 years, with tariffs paid in US dollars rather than in Pak rupees. At that time, the dollar was 30 rupees. Today, it's around 280 rupees. Likewise, all IPPs commissioned then used furnace oil. At that time, the cost of furnace oil was about 2,800 rupees per ton. Today, it's around 130,000 rupees per ton. But the most heavily criticized element of the tariff was the guaranteed capacity payment, which forced WAPDA to pay for power capacity it was not actually buying. Then, to hide all this, the tariff rates agreed upon in these contracts disguised IPP's real cost to WAPDA and the public. Criminally lucrative terms attracted a lot of private companies. But Pakistan People's Party, which was in government, after seeing private investors' interest, rather than reviewing the terms, kept signing the deals. And in the public, they kept boasting that Pakistan had finally started attracting huge FDIs. The privatization of our energy sector wasn't without corruption. In 1997, when the Nawaz Sharif government came to power, it accused the World Bank manager of energy projects in South Asia, Mr. Ibrahim Elwan, for corruption and appropriation of funds. Interestingly, the World Bank was Pakistan government's sole advisor during all these deals, notwithstanding that their investment was only 20%. To cut the story short, the World Bank found he was involved and thus removed him. His corruption story hit the New York Times. But that did not stop IPP's commissioning on those cockeyed terms. After the 1994 power policy, Pakistan had two more major policy reviews, one in 2002 and then another in 2013. In both cases, policymakers were careful not to specify any figures for required capacity, nor did they state a preference for the public or private power, declaring such decisions to be contingent upon clearly established future demands. The government also promoted the concept of projects undertaken through public-private partnerships, allowing it to get the same conditions as solely private power generation projects. This was an improvement, as the benefits and drawbacks to new public or private plants can be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. The major change was that the bulk power tariff was removed. International competitive bidding was introduced instead, which to some extent benefited the consumer through lower electricity prices. However, The reviews kept clauses of the old policy, such as standardized agreements. In addition, the tariff still consists of an energy and a capacity payment, and investors retained guaranteed money-spinning return on their equity. To make all this palatable, the public was told that such measures are a must to attract FDI in the energy sector. One major criticism is that while the tariff was now denominated in Pakistani rupees, it was still indexed to the exchange rate of the US dollar. This means that the tariff can still rise if rupee devaluation continues as before. But unlike the 1994 policy, under which all IPPs were thermal power plants, often using furnace oil as a fuel, the new policy encouraged the use of indigenous fuels and hydel power projects. One major factor for the absence of hydel IPPs was the WAPDA risk assessment during all these contracts. It cautioned the hazard of water availability for plants with a capacity bigger than 50 megawatts, which discouraged investors to set up cheap hydro-generated power plants. Nevertheless, by 2020, there was a general realization among policymakers that the IPP contracts, if not renegotiated, would financially bankrupt Pakistan. However, this wasn't an easy task, as the contract deals had quite enough legal cover. During this time, when the government pushed IPPs to renegotiate their contracts, an impression was projected through the media that these IPPs are mostly owned by foreign conglomerates and reneging the deals would trigger legal complications. This isn't true. To our surprise, what we now know is that out of the present 101 IPPs, 52% are owned by the government, whereas 28% belong to Pakistan's private sector. That means in total, 80% of today's IPPs are owned by Pakistani. So finally, in 2023-2024, the present government, under IMF pressure, started cost-side reforms by either terminating or renegotiating power purchasing agreements. They selected only 18 IPPs for that. Though exact details of these reforms are not available yet, revised agreements are projected in print and electronic media to save the government 1.4 trillion rupees over their next term duration. This haircutting would bring down only rupees 5 per kilowatt hour of electricity tariff. Just to make sense, and for you to understand how messed up things are, let me underscore a few extraordinary details. Last year, Mr. Gohar Ejaz, ex-federal minister, came out on record revealing that 28% of IPPs are owned by 40 influential families of Pakistan. That to some degree explains why all governments paid lip service to put this mess right. The government, in fact, was paying annually rupees 46 billions to two IPPs with zero power generation. One is HUBCO, owned by Engru Habibullah Group, and the other is CAPCO of WAPDA. More disturbing is the fact that 41 IPPs out of 101, that is almost half of the total number, operate at 4 to 25% of their capacity. Likewise, one could imagine the kind of fiscal hemorrhaging the government is experiencing from the fact that WAPDA procured electricity during 2023 and 2024 from Rouge Power Plant, owned by the Daud Group, at rupees 745.65 per unit, while it provided electricity to the public at rupees 60 per unit. It's important to note here that WAPDA buys electricity units from thermal power plants at rupees 740 per unit, from coal power plants at rupees 200 per unit, and from wind or solar power plants at only rupees 50 per unit. Similarly, the government has made settlement agreements with 8 IPPs running on bagasse, saving rupees 240 billion. These plants were allowed to index locally produced bagasse price to that of the South African imported one. As a result, the plants charged 110% increased fuel costs. Why would we do that? What could be more criminal? At present, Pakistan has an installed capacity of 45,000 megawatts, while peak summer demand is 30,000 megawatts and winter demand is at most 17,000 megawatts. The overestimated demand and underutilized capacity are due to poorly managed policy frameworks, with no efforts to balance summer and winter demand through innovative seasonal tariffs. Secondly, if we're producing electricity in excess and are paying for that, what stops us from providing this surplus electricity to export-oriented industries at very cheap rates? This is the story of IPPs in Pakistan, how these setups looted the government and the public for so long, and are doing so even now. Pakistan cannot progress until its lawmakers bring down the cost of energy. Pakistan needs dollars, and for that she has to increase her exports through industrialization, which isn't possible without having cheap energy. The government has just renegotiated 18 IPPs agreements. but much more needs to be done. Unfortunately, the secrecy among government officials on IPP issues is immense. It exists to such an extent that even the methodology used to calculate tariffs for the 1994 IPPs still remains unknown. We must understand that transparency and accountability within our energy sector would make the needed reforms fair and easy. The government should make all agreements of these 101 IPPs public because these affect the masses. The baseline is there should be no capacity payments, only payments for electricity purchases from the cheapest electricity supplies. All IPPs should be treated as merchants as plants like any other business. There's much more to Pakistan's energy crisis, but for the time being, we've highlighted some details showing what's wrong with IPPs and how these contracts are denying Pakistan her much-needed economic recovery. We hope our efforts can improve the public's awareness on this subject. As always, drop your thoughts in the comments below. For detailed insights and in-depth coverage on related topics, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, stay safe and stay kind. Allah Hafiz.